BookTok, Book Life.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to BookTok, Book Life. My name is Mason Maddox, and I welcome you to a panel talk about the connections of different yet connected novels. One consisting of Slaughterhouse 5, and the other, possibly, of The Invisible Man. We will go over 3 topics today. The connection to external stories, such as the myth of Sisyphus in the Book of Job from the Bible, and we will also go over the character transformations of the protagonist's view of mental and spiritual issues. The overall structure of today's panel goes by this. Slaughterhouse 5 and The Invisible Man both have parallels to the myth of Sisyphus and to the Book of Job, while also showing their unique transformations throughout the full text by explaining and presenting the protagonist's personal trials, no matter mental or spiritual. So, while Slaughterhouse 5 is an anti-war book, it still has connections to the Book of Job, even though they are 2 completely, vastly different stories. They've both lost everything, Billy in the war and Job losing his entire family and cattle. Not only this, but in a way of religion, one can see the Tralfamadorians as an outside world control force. Giving advice to Billy and asking him to live their way. And with Job, he follows the body of Christ, and he follows Christ to the very end and gets everything back tenfold. So Billy follows his own PTSD in a way, and one can say that his PTSD is his own following.
The myth of Sisyphus has parallels to Billy Pilgrim's war experiences because, like the never-ending cycle of Sisyphus having to roll a boulder up the hill, Billy has a never-ending, eternal struggle of being unstuck in time.
The novel that I chose to read is The Invisible Man by Ralph Ellison. This novel really goes into depth of the 1950s. The book it was published in 1952 by Ralph Ellison. It really goes into depth how African Americans were treated and how an African American, which is not listed, it's just the protagonist of the story. It's how he's treated in his life and how societal norms were controlling his life. And I'm gonna touch on how that his environment in society was absurd, and I'm gonna touch on how he grew throughout the book. And I'm also going to touch on his comparison to Sisyphus.
The first topic that we will be discussing as a group is how our choice of novel reflects and has a connection with the myth of Sisyphus and or the Book of Job from the Bible. One of the ways Billy Pilgrim relates to Job is through what they've lost. So, the Book of Job consists of a test from God that makes Job lose pretty much everything. He loses his wife, his sons, his daughters, his cow, his cattle, his land, everything. In the same sense, Billy was sent into war with nothing. No gear, no hope, no instructions, no anything. They both had no sense of what was going on, but they just had to survive and go with it. While Job loses his world, Billy loses his mind. With Billy's mind is absent, he loses his sense of reality. And he knows what's coming, yet he can't control it. And in that, he loses his wife, as the same as Job does. On that same hand, Job accepts that he's losing everything, and yet he still accepts his creator. And he doesn't lose sight of the good in his life, and he keeps on going, just as Billy does during the war. And throughout his life, just as Billy accepts his fate with his PTSD. Another connection that can be seen through a vastly different stories is the idea of religion. While yes, it isn't quite the same, it still has shocking congruencies. Billy follows the ideas of the, sorry if I mispronounced this, Tralfamadorians, and he sees them as leaders or teachers, and he follows in the way of life. Just as Job follows in Christ, and he wants to live life through him, just as Billy wants to live life through the Tralfamadorians, because he sees their way of living as easier, in a sense. So for Job, in a Christian sense, he wants to live through Christ and walk with him. Job wants to live like Christ, and, well, Billy wants to live like the Tralfamadorians and goes through his life living their ideals and sensations.
Billy Pilgrim struggles from PTSD because he fought in World War II. From this disease, it has caused him to become unstuck in time and live events in his life at random times. The downfall of Billy Pilgrim is him believing all of the absurd events that are happening to him, including time travel. Because of his PTSD, Billy believes that what he is experiencing cannot be stopped, and this is why it becomes an ongoing cycle. He has nothing or no one to help him show him reality. Sisyphus has a punishment to roll a huge boulder up a hill. Once he gets to the top, he thinks the punishment is over, but he has to consistently repeat this action for eternity. This connects to the character of Billy Pilgrim because he cannot stop what is happening to him and what he is experiencing. He is spastic in time and has no control over where he is going next. The eternal punishment of Sisyphus connects back to Billy Pilgrim's PTSD because both events will never cease to exist. They will always have to keep fighting, whether it is mentally like Billy in his PTSD or physically like Sisyphus in his punishment in a never-ending cycle.
Comparison with Sisyphus. In Ralph Ellison's Invisible Man, the protagonist's plight bears a striking resemblance to the philosophical myth of the character Sisyphus, written by Albert Camus. Both figures are trapped in a perpetual struggle against forces beyond their control, confronting the absurdity of their existence. Sisyphus, condemned by Zeus to roll a boulder up a hill, only to watch it roll back down for eternity, embodies the futility of human endeavors in the face of an indifferent universe. So basically, that story, he has no control over his fate, and that makes Sisyphus's terms of his punishment absurd. Okay. Similarly, the protagonist of Invisible Man finds himself trapped in a cycle of societal oppression and invisibility, where his efforts to assert his identity are frequently frustrated by systematic racism and prejudice. The parallel is exemplified in the protagonist's realization that I am invisible, understanding simply because people refuse to see me, on page 3. Here, Ellison captures the protagonist's struggle to assert his existence in a world that denies his humanity. Quote from the book, I was pulled this way and that for as long that I can remember, and my problem was that I always tried to go in everyone's way but my own. This is kind of highlighting on how he can't really be himself because he's trying to fulfill what everyone else wants him to do, basically whatever society wants him to do. Because he's below and he just wants to stay in line, and he thinks if he can do that, he can be successful, basically. I have also been called on one thing and then another while no one really wishes to hear what I call myself. Basically, he's just talking about how everyone is trying to put this into his life, like society's trying to condemn him and make him below them, and his grandfather's highlights that because he was the same way. And then all these viewpoints of his life, he doesn't have his own say, he doesn't have his own name, he's invisible, he's just everything, not anything, he's just everything's around him and he's kind of just in the middle of all of it. Okay. This quote illustrates the protagonist's struggle to assist his own identity, desires amidst the conflicting expectations that judgments impose upon him by society. Despite his efforts to navigate through the life, he finds himself consistently being pushed and pulled by external forces, highlighting his invisibility in the sense his true self and intentions are overlooked or disregarded by others. Like Sisyphus, who persisted in the task despite an apparent meaningless, the protagonist persists to resist societal injustice even as it threatens to overwhelm him.
The second topic this panel is going to discuss is how the protagonist transforms throughout the novel. So from beginning to middle to end throughout the novel, how they progress mentally, physically, spiritually, or however, how they view society or how they view war. So since Billy's progression as a person is going to be more touched into depth later, I wanted to focus on his mental progression, or some people might call it degression. Billy's brought into a war zone, mentally and physically. Not only was he thrown into the Second World War, he was also prepared with nothing. He had no sergeant, he had no telling what to do, he had no leader, he had no physical strength, he had no physical ability, he had no gear, he had nothing. He was thrown into something that nobody could have ever prepared for, and especially him. With most veterans, they're at least physically prepared for it. He was not. He was scrawny and not ready for what was about to come. As the start of Billy's mental transition, it's completely thrown out of proportion, and it gets worse and worse as he goes on. Towards the end of the war, he never cried. His emotions has hardened so much to where, whether he saw anything that was unpleasant, he wouldn't think of much of it. His emotions would let it pass by him without a single trace of sadness. The only time he did feel emotion was when it didn't really process from humans. It was from whenever the horses were mistreated, and he was sobbing because they didn't have a good life. That's the only time that he cried during the war, which really says something about what a war does to a person. After the war, he had developed issues with PTSD, and it had gotten so real that he felt like he was stuck in time, whether it was stuck in time with his past self, back with the war in Dresden, or just stuck in time in a future planet with aliens called Tralfamadorians. He had imagined aliens as in a completely different area. Sorry. And he couldn't control or expect it. At the end of the novel, Billy had really just given in to what they wanted and given into what his PTSD and his reality wanted. Because he wasn't living in the real world, so to speak. He was living in his own head constantly. He lived in a reality that wasn't true, and whether it was his past self or with aliens across to another planet, he wanted to live by that. It had gotten so bad that, he didn't even know his wife died. He never really saw his children because he was so stuck in his own head, he couldn't get out of it. So his mental stability, instead of the progression as a character, his mental stability had declined in the process.
Throughout the novel, Slaughterhouse 5 by Kurt Vonnegut, the character of Billy Pilgrim goes through a major transformation by going from being detached from his life to learning to accept the absurdities that are thrown at him in any given situation. At the beginning of the novel, Billy is shown to be almost an outsider to his own life, witnessing events from a bystander point of view instead of him actually living during the moments in his life. Billy's mental issues and PTSD from World War II, coupled with his realization of time-traveling abilities, he meets aliens called the Tralfamadorians, who help him time travel. Billy learns more about his life piece by piece while interacting with the Tralfamadorians. When first being with the Tralfamadorians, Billy sees that all the events in his life are happening all at once, and they are all interconnected in some way. Through spending more time with the Tralfamadorians, he learns that the past is unchangeable and the future is inevitable. This is important because this starts the process of Billy learning to deal with his idea that life is meaningless. After continuing to build relationships with the Tralfamadorians through time travel, they start to teach him their philosophies about life. They say to Billy that he will be happiest if he lives in the moment and concentrates on the happy moments of his life and to ignore the unhappy ones. Coming to the end of the novel, Billy has adopted the Tralfamadorian way of life into his own and is taking their advice to heart. Billy is now able to see the happiness in life even when in chaos, because he looks for any positive elements amongst the negative ones. The reader can see Billy's shift of character through him being more accepting of life and how he can now be more resilient when dealing with the disease of PTSD and bad events occurred in his life.
Now we are going to talk about his character growth throughout the book. In the beginning scene, he says, "I was praised by the most lily white men of the town. I was considered an example of desirable contact, just as my grandfather had been." At the start of the novel, the protagonist is filled with ambition and determination to fit into the harsh, prejudiced society he is condemned in. He believes that if he stays suppressed by society like his grandfather, he will be viewed as one of the good ones by white men and accepted. He has a burning to be accepted and relies on societal expectations. He basically just believes if he stays under the radar and just is oppressed and just follows the white man and does whatever they say, he's going to be seen as one of the good ones, and he'll get privilege for that, and he'll be accepted. And he grows throughout the scene into the middle scene, where he says, "It was not the harsh, uninterested in you as a human being stare that I had known in the South, the kind that swept over a black man as though he was a horse or insect." This is where he starts to show that he notices the disillusionment as he faces various instances of discrimination and marginalism. He starts to recognize the invisibility thrust upon him by society, where he is treated as insignificant and ignored. The realization leads him to question his identity and purpose. This is where he's starting to understand to where that he's not viewed as no matter what he does, he's not going to be viewed by society as what he wants to be viewed as, or as the American dream, and that he can be successful and fit in society if he does what he's told. He's just going to be viewed as below human. In the closing scene, he's talking to a woman. I got this out of the prologue. He says, "Old woman, what is this freedom you love so well?" This conversation is with an old woman who is originally a slave and loved her master because his father to her children. She starts talking about how much she loves her master, but loves freedom even more. Him asking the old woman, "What is this freedom?" shows that even though he is in an era where slavery does not exist, he doesn't know freedom due to the prejudice and oppressive society he is forced to live in, deeming him invisible to everyone. By the end of the novel, the protagonist reaches a level of acceptance regarding his invisibility. He understands that society will never truly see him for who he is, but instead of feeling defeated, he finds empowerment in this realization. He no longer seeks for validation from others, but instead embraces invisibility as a form of liberation, allowing him to define his own identity and purpose. This evolution showcases the protagonist's journey from naivety to self-awareness and acceptance of his invisibility. Through his experiences, he learns to navigate a world that refuses to see him, finding his strength and embracing his true self despite societal expectations. True self despite societal expectations.
All in all, the two novels, even though they are about two contrasting topics, have the same connections to the myth of Sisyphus and to the Book of Job. Whether you see from either side of the spectrum anti-war or anti-racism, there is still a connection to the main value of absurdism. The idea that the universe is meaningless, so why try? It fits into the discussion of war and, well, with the ideas of attempting to change society as a whole. Although we have run out of time, unfortunately, we appreciate that you have come and listened to us. Thank you for watching, and we will see you next time on BookTok, Book Life. Thanks for watching. BookTok, Book Life.